What's going on, everyone? Welcome to episode 3. I got 3 new topics. One was actually submitted by a fan on the last YouTube video in the comments, so I'm going to cover that. Please, as I said before, like, share the video, do whatever you need to do to get it out there. The last 2 MythBusters episodes, the stats have literally been climbing upwards. I can see the stuff. I can see all the comments. I try to reply back to everyone. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Let's get on to episode 3. This myth, I'm going to form it like this. You do not need a blow-off valve in order to run a turbo setup. And I'm going to call that false, but hear me out. Let me explain. So as I'm doing these videos, I've been thinking the best way to respond. Of course, every question could have multiple answers. I'm going to give you the answer that I would give to a customer, whether they be calling, walking in, sending a message. That's how I'm going to respond. So do you need a blow-off valve to run a turbo setup and have it work correctly? You don't. But that main word at the very end, correctly. See, let me explain first what the actual goal for the blow-off valve is, in case you're fairly new. So I got a throttle body. I don't have a turbo. I'm not going to try to juggle that. So when a turbo is spooling up and it's building boost, let's say 10 PSI, and you immediately close your throttle body, you're doing a wide open throttle pull. Make all your turbo noises here. After the pull, as I said, 10 PSI, you're closing that. The 10 PSI needs to go somewhere. That is what the blow-off valve does. The blow-off valve is going to open up and it's going to relieve that pressure. What happens if you don't have a blow-off valve? And I know I can already see the comments, well, my buddy doesn't run one and this and this and that. Once again, go back to what I said. If a customer were to call here, would I give him the whole long explanation of what I'm doing right now in this video? No. Well, hopefully he can find this video and he can understand better. In order for the turbo system to work correctly and to relieve that pressure, that is what a blow-off valve does. It's going to open up as soon as you close that throttle body. The pressure is going to relieve here. So if you don't have a blow-off valve, where's that pressure going to go? Well, it's going to force itself back into the turbo, and that's where you might have heard some people say, that's compressor surge, turbo flutter. Some guys actually love that sound too. Like, we have guys that call us up and they want to know what blow-off valve will sound like that. So the thing is, if that pressure has nowhere to go, if you're not running a blow-off valve, it's going to kick back in to the turbo, or it's going to put load on the actual turbo itself, which can cause premature failure or premature wear. Now, as I stated with this question, and I explained it twice about my answer, can you run a turbo without a turbo system without blow-off valve? Yeah, you can. Will the turbo last just as long? Who knows? Who knows? That's one of these things too. As I said before, I like to dumb stuff down. Can you go on the highway, do 100 miles per hour, and close your eyes for 2 minutes and not get in an accident? Maybe, but why would you? There's really no reason why you shouldn't run a blow-off valve. If, these guys cost about $300, give or take. If price is an issue, I always tell people, well, you can go try to find one used, or, this is way back in the day, homemade turbo system setups, you run a DSM blow-off valve. They can be found for about $50, maybe even cheaper. Go on eBay, type in DSM blow-off valve. You'll see the price. So, can you run a turbo system without a blow-off valve? Answer would be yes. Is it recommended? No. Of course not. And I just explained why. So going forward, if you want to run one without one, you got to know what can possibly happen to the turbo, and you're going to, have possibly a failure sooner than later, or have the turbo wear down sooner than later. Wear down means your turbo is going to maybe start smoking. You're going to have issues like that. It's just not worth it. So hopefully I explained that. Very simple. Let's go to the next one. So this one was actually submitted by a fan last week. And as I said, I'm going to do my best to cover questions or submissions from fans, but I also did get a bunch of other submissions. Those will be coming in the next couple episodes. So this one is going to read like this. I'm going to phrase it how he said. I think he said it. You cannot run a built block on a daily driven setup. That answer would be false. I have a piston in my hand, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Now, when you're building an engine, you can build it for, let's just say, 400 or 500 horsepower. We're speaking about a Honda application here. Or you can build it for the other side of 500 horsepower, which would be, 700 horsepower, 800 horsepower, where we recommend once you pass that 500 mark, actually once you pass around 450, 500, it is always safe to get sleeves done. So if you're building that block for 400 or 500 horsepower, the clearances should be a little bit tighter than if you were setting a block up for about 800 to 900 horsepower. When I'm talking about clearance, I'm talking about the piston to wall clearance, and there's other clearances, with the bearings and stuff, but I have a piston in my hand, and we're going to use this as an example. Piston to wall clearance is the space between the pistons and the cylinder walls, exactly like it sounds. You have to consider power as heat, and everything's going to want to expand more. So as you're tossing more power, more heat into the actual engine, the piston's going to want to expand even more. So if you're building a block for 800 horsepower compared to 400 horsepower, your clearances are going to be a lot bigger. So what does that mean ultimately? Well, if you ever heard a buddy's car start up in the cold and it sounds almost like a diesel truck because the piston is flapping around, that's because the piston to wall clearance is a little bit looser than, say, factory spec. The other thing to take in consideration, this is a cast piston. This is a Vtec piston on a single cam D16 block I'm building. Most, not all, don't hold me to that, most aftermarket pistons are forged. So this one is cast, as I said. Different properties of how they heat up, how they expand, and all that stuff. So ultimately, you also have to talk about the piston rings. It's the same thing as the piston to wall clearance. As you make more power, the clearances should be a little bit looser. So ultimately, what does this all mean? As I tell my customers, if we build a block for 800 horsepower, I have to build it to the spec of 800 horsepower. I can't build it for 500 horsepower. Even if you're making 500 horsepower at the moment, I have to build it for the most amount of horsepower that you're going to make later on. If I build it for 500 horsepower and I don't take in consideration you're going to make 800 later, you could possibly have an issue where you're going to have the piston scoring into the wall because the clearances are too tight. You can have a bunch of other issues, but the big difference is if the clearances are a little bit looser, as I was trying to say that, you might get a little bit of blow-by. You might get a little smoke from the tailpipe. That's because the block is built for 800 horsepower compared to 4 or 5. So what ultimately changes if the car's a daily driven car? Well, ultimately nothing. Now, we're not talking about the whole fuel setup, the ignition setup, and all that stuff, but the engine itself, let me go back. The computer, they don't know that the engine is built. Your engine doesn't know what's in it. Your computer doesn't ultimately know what's in it. Well, when you're getting it tuned, the tuner does and sets it all up for it. Now, there are some setups, specifically aluminum rods. You can have an aluminum rod in Honda blocks. Those are very popular. We don't recommend those for a daily driven car because of the maintenance those require. If you're doing aluminum rods, you should be tearing down your engine a lot more frequently. And I mean a lot more frequently than a standard build that most guys are getting. So if you're going to daily drive this car, and let's say you have an aluminum rods, are you going to start tearing down the motor every certain amount of miles, which is going to be very frequently? Are you ready to tear it down every 2 months or so just to see how everything's working? And of course, it all depends on how much you beat on the car. If you're going to be beating on the car a lot more, and those, let's say, 5,000 miles you put on the car are a lot harder than you just normally driving, well, then it should be tore down quicker. So can you daily drive a built engine? Yes, of course you can. A lot of our customers do. And, depending on how it's properly set up, I have built blocks for 700 horsepower, and they're not any louder than an OEM block, as long as it's set up correctly. From what I see is a lot of guys build the blocks, they don't take the specs. One of the questions I ask them, if a guy ever comes in with a built block, hey, what are the specs? Well, what do you mean? What's the piston to wall clearance? Oh, I don't know. I just dropped the piston right in the block. I didn't even account for that. Well, what's the ring gap? Oh, I took them out of the box. I didn't even check that. There's a lot that comes into the equation of having a built block last. Let's go back, and just because I'm saying that you can daily drive a built block doesn't mean that you don't know a buddy that maybe built his own block and only lasted for 500 miles and then something happened. So going back to the original question, can you daily drive a built block? The answer would be yes. Moving on to our next question, or myth, and I'm going to word this exactly how we get it sometimes. A JDM Vtec solenoid and or if Vtec cracks harder, you're going to make more power. So that's kind of a two-portion here, and I wanted to throw it in. So what we hear from time to time, this is kind of like an old school myth, is JDM Vtec solenoids have a stiffer spring in it that causes Vtec to open harder. The whole question and everything I phrased is false. this whole topic, and as I was thinking, between the JDM and the USDM Vtec solenoids, the part number should be different because the oil pressure sensor is not used on specific models, but it's very easy to bypass. I'm going to explain really quick what Vtec does. Hopefully you get an idea of what I'm talking about, and I also got a Dino Sheet I'm going to show you. So the Vtec solenoid, when commanded to, is going to open up a passage here that is going to shoot oil into the rocker shaft. The rockers sit on here, and as you see these little holes, that's how the oil goes through the rocker. So you're going to have the oil come through. When the Vtec solenoid opens, it's going to open up a passage. It's going to allow the oil to flow through here, and it's going to lock all of these together. The middle one is the Vtec rocker. That is going to be what the Vtec lobe sits on. So normally, the Vtec rocker is not coming into play. These are all moving how they should. When the oil kicks in, it locks them all together. And now, you are riding on, that middle lobe is a little bit bigger than the rest. That is the Vtec lobe. So when you hit Vtec, and the car screams, not all cars scream like that, depending on the setup, but when Vtec kicks in, you're going to get more power because you're now off of the Vtec lobe, which is bigger. So I just explained to you how Vtec operates and works. As far as Vtec hitting harder, the stuff that actually causes Vtec to open up, besides the command in the computer that tells it to, it also is looking for an RPM, so it's not opening up at idle if you're just revving it. It's also going to look for a specific coolant temp, so it doesn't operate when the car's too cold. So as I was saying, all that goes hand in hand. Oil kicks in, pressure goes in, locks the rocker. The solenoid, all it's doing is opening up. As far as the spring goes inside, it's not going to change. You can go get a Type R one, you can go get a USDM one, put them on the dyno, they're going to make the same power. So that whole first equation about the JDM solenoids, that's a myth. That's been going on since 1998, 99, probably even way before that, as far as what I remember. So now you talk about, well, the Vtec hits harder, and let me give you an example, kind of what we get every now and then. Hey, my Vtec is set at 4,500, and it doesn't hit as loud as it did before, or it doesn't crack as loud. That's what we hear. Can we change it? Now let me show you a Dino Sheet. And the goal for Vtec is you want it as smooth as possible transitioning over. That's what ultimately the tune's going to do. So if it was cracking louder or sounding louder beforehand, that's because the vehicle was untuned. So now let me show you really quick, and it's not that hard to figure out where Vtec needs to go. There's a whole, you set it on the tune, you basically set it at a low spot where you start dropping power off. With low cam, you activate Vtec, which is called the high cam. Then the high, so let's just say at 4,200 RPM, you're slowly climbing upwards. And then at 4,400 RPM, the power we're talking about is starting to kind of go down. Well, that's where you activate Vtec, and then it still continues to go upwards. So there's no really crazy theory on that. There's a little other stuff that you can maybe make more power down the road if you play around with it, but that's a whole other different video with tuning. Now let me get you the Dino Sheet and show you. Okay, so I have the Dino Sheet, and I printed it twice. I printed it once with the actual power difference, and one without. And then I cut it down because I don't want anyone to cheat here, but I really want you guys to guess. Guess down below, whatever. Hurry up. Do it. So you can see here, just by changing the Vtec engagement, I almost shared the other answer there, the top line is engaging a little bit earlier, and then the bottom line is engaging a little bit lower. You can actually see in the darker line, as I was just stating before this little clip, how power's going down. Vtec should be kicking in there, but it's not. It's ultimately kicking in here. So that doesn't seem like a big difference, right? Any guesses how much how much power do you think? Well, how much power difference? And this is what I would call the power band. So when you hear me talk in some videos and say, hey, you're not going to make, your max horsepower might not jump a lot, but the power band is going to change. This is what you're going to feel when driving. This is the difference between a simple base map that you would just download from a device and upload, and then an actual tune, an actual dyno tune where I'm going in and changing things. So, okay, ready? The lower number is 140 horsepower, and then the top number is 153 horsepower. We'll say 13 horsepower difference just by changing Vtec. That's what you're going to feel in the tune. That's what you're going to feel when you're driving. And of course, if your power is kicking down and you're engaging lower and now you are making less power, yes, Vtec is going to sound like it's hitting harder. Or opening up harder. Does that mean you're actually making more power? No. I've actually had a guy argue with me before, and I said, hey, I'll set it wherever you want me to set it at, but I want you to sign a piece of paper stating that this is not the correct spot to put it for performance, and you will lose power. Because at the end of the day, I am tuning your car how it should be tuned, and if you want it to be changed just because of the sound, well, ultimately, if you were to go anywhere else, and then the car gets tuned anywhere else, and that tuner says, whoever tuned this before set Vtec wrong, well, I don't want any fingers pointed at me. I told you so. Yes, it sounds a little bit quieter, but that's because the transitioning is smoother. So if you're trying to change your Vtec solenoid because you think it's going to hit harder, louder, make more power, or even if you're changing it because of this, you can easily bypass that. You can message us. We'll tell you how. Don't do it. Don't believe it. Don't believe the myth. Go out there to all your buddies and friends. Run down wherever you're at right now. If you're watching this and your parents are home or whatever, your significant other, tell them. Tell them what I just told you so they know. Just joking. Hopefully you enjoyed. So that wraps up this video. As I said in the intro, like and share. It is helping the channel grow. These MythBusters videos are skyrocketing. I see you guys sharing this stuff. I appreciate it. Thank you. As I said before in my other videos, I try to sum everything down. Is there a lot more explanations that I can do on certain topics? Yes. I'd be talking for 10 or 15 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes just on one topic, trying to narrow it down. So in this video, you saw specifically about the engine build. Can you daily drive a built engine? There's other stuff that always comes into play too. But to answer the guy's question, yes, you can. And before I get all the comments that, well, this, as I just said, I'm trying to sum it all up in about a 15-minute long video. I love to talk. I can easily extend a topic to 30, 45 minutes, whatever down the road. And I got some other stuff that I'm going to be working on too, though, that will get into detail on that stuff. So keep watching, keep sharing, keep commenting. It motivates me to keep on going. And without you guys, I'd be making videos for nobody. I could still make videos, but, it'd be for nobody. So I really appreciate everybody. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day, whatever time it may be.